Good job, band.
Yay, band.
That was awesome. I know my band. I know the band. They love it when I walk up there and I go, "Hey, changing plans," and then they do it awesomely. So we're really blessed to have the music that we have here. And I hope if you're visiting with us, no doubt you may be confused. We started off with "You're So Vain." What a great sacred song to open up with. But as I like to say, because I often get, this is one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't kinds of realities that we live in, right? If we say something, somebody on one side is going to say something back to us. If we say the other thing, then somebody on the other side is going to say something back to us. I'm going to get an email this week. I mean, that Tim Brewster over in the traditional service is just always amazing. We all sit around and it's just amazing the kinds of, we just have feelings on our shoulders right now. We're tense. But here's the thing. There's a lot of vanity in that. There's a lot of vanity in holding on to that. Maybe that song isn't about one individual. Maybe that song's not about any particular individual even today. Maybe that song's about us. You know, as an interesting story that circulates around, I think it's still in the AA community. I knew it because of Al-Anon. I was active in Al-Anon in a family with alcoholics and such, and substance abuse. And I remember this story that was told that just made me think of this song that Brad and the band just did. There's a story that goes very simple like this. I knew a man who lived in hell, but he couldn't leave. He knew the street names too well. There's this side of our faith that traps us. There's this side of our culture that entraps us because we know it so well. And that's what I think the Beatitudes offer. It comes at a time when Jesus is right out of the chute. I mean, he's got, I think, 4 disciples at this point, and he's sitting on a hill, and the very first things out of his mouth are basically saying, here's what you thought, and you were wrong. And he literally just turns everything upside down. The 10 Commandments, the Deuteronomic Law, the roadmap was clear. And unfortunately, it was pretty obvious that a lot of folks got in and a lot of folks weren't getting in. And if the Pharisees, the Levites, the temple priests, it was clear who was closest to God, and it was clear who was not. And Jesus sits down and says the first thing out of his mouth is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Now Luke's gospel has it, "Blessed are the poor." Matthew's gospel has it, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And if it's saying anything at all, the next 10 commandments, the next 8 Beatitudes after that, if they're saying anything at all, it's saying, toss your roadmap aside. Just throw the roadmap out. Because even, it's almost like the old Buddhist saying, I'm throwing some Buddhism out. It's almost like the old Buddhist saying where the teacher said, when you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. It's that same idea that you think you understand, but you don't. And the moment you do think you understand, you need to let go of that. Blessed are the poor in spirit. It's not the high and mighty. It's not the amazing spiritual leader. Lord knows it's not me. I hope you take what I say with a grain of salt. If it resonates, fine. Throw it away as soon as you walk out the door. Just be open. Think and reflect. But Jesus was saying, it's the poor in spirit. Now, what that means I want to discuss with you for just a few seconds, but I want to think with you, first of all, about maps and about where we are in our world today and about fear. Because fear is basically where we are today. We're just seeing it right in the face. We're being slapped right and left with it. And roadmaps are designed to keep away from fear. They're designed to sort of track your life so that you don't have to face the fear, so that you have some security, some guidelines. And sometimes our roadmaps consist of the echo chambers we surround ourselves with. But it's not really a direction. It's really just trying to keep out the fear. You understand what I'm saying? A lot of times we surround ourselves with like-minded folks, not because we're actually looking for a direction, but simply because we're trying to avoid the fear. That's not a direction. That's not really going anywhere. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are starting basically from scrap, who've tossed things aside, who are empty. I bought a car over this last week. Seems like a strange thing to say when you're talking about blessed are the poor in spirit. I turned 60, so there. I haven't had a newish car in 15 to 20 years. It's a Mini Cooper. So yes, I'm having a midlife crisis. I own it proudly. Actually, it's a very used one, but it's one I could afford, and I just wanted a 6-speed. Somebody said, you wanted a 6-speed? I said, yes, because I know that the first thing that's going to go in me is my mind, so I want to be focused on something. You know, I just want to stay focused. Driving on the road is very easy to get distracted. I have to stay focused, so I bought a 6-speed. And it's the Countryman because it's a little bigger than the other ones, and so I won't be crunched quite as much when I'm hit by the big, huge pickups and stuff that are out there. But here's the thing. I went to Irving, and I'll share this story, and I don't think this individual would mind. I hope he won't mind. I'll leave him pretty anonymous, but the salesperson that I met was a wonderful young man, and I made that mistake on the test drive as we got in the car, and I'm test driving the car, and he says, we're going to go down here, we're going to go down the side road, we'll take a left under the bridge, we'll come back, we'll ride along, you can kind of open it up on one of the boulevards there, and then we'll turn around and we'll come back. And I said, great. So it's about a 10-minute test drive, just to kind of check it out. And we got in the car, and we're driving down the access, and he says, so what do you do? And I thought about avoiding it, because I've told you before, it's one of those hazards, one of the liabilities of being a minister, that when you open up, you say you're a minister, that's a tantamount to saying, I'm a priest, what do you need to confess? Back there, we're going to have Mini Cooper Confessions. It's a new TV series. And the reality is that I thought about that and then decided no, because I don't know where this might go, and I'm willing to go there. I'm usually afraid to go there because it could mean anything. It could mean they label me and they start joining in with this echo chamber from the right. It could be somebody who's completely atheist and who has no desire to know anything about God, and it shuts down our conversation, right? It could be any number of things. And I just said, I'm a minister. I run an alternative service at First United Methodist downtown in Fort Worth, and been that way for a long time. Used to travel around telling stories, but that's what I do now. He says, you're a Methodist minister. And then the conversation opens up. He says, my former wife was Church of Christ, and we're going through a divorce right now. And he said, I was Baptist. I grew up Baptist. And we're talking, he's 30. As the conversation goes along, we get into all of his childhood growing up in a Southern Baptist church, and the challenges of that, and marrying into a Church of Christ family, and the challenges there, and basically throwing everything out with the, baby with the bathwater as far as faith goes, because it was just such a conflict. That roadmap didn't work for him. And then he says he went off to war, and then before we know it, he's kind of saying, I went off because I didn't know what else to do. Because I was to get a college scholarship, he said, in baseball, and then I broke my arm that summer before I was to go to college, and I lost the scholarship. I lost everything. And then I got married, and then I got jobs, and then it went on and on and on. And that's when we realized that I was now on the interstate, and I was headed way out towards Granbury. Towards the Grapevine. I was headed way out towards Grapevine and headed north and west, and I looked over at him and I said, did we miss a turn? And we both looked down and said, about 25 minutes ago. We had completely forgotten about where we were. I'm just glad I was still kind of semi-watching the highway. So I got off, we turned around. Needless to say, one story led into another story, led into another story, led into questions about life and death, led into questions about forgiveness and where is God anyway. And all of the questions had more questions than answers. And at one point he looked up and he said, I kind of like that. And I kind of smiled. I said, so tell me about your time in Iraq. And he had a large scar on the side where he had been in one of those roadside bombs that his vehicle had been in. And so he was discharged honorably after serving time. And even that had lots of questions. And then once again, we looked up and I said, did we miss our turn? And we had. And I'm telling you that was an hour and a half test drive. when I finally turned around and we got back to the store, and I said, I've used up a lot of your, you probably could have gotten another deal before this, day was out. But, he lives out there. He said as soon as he moves over to Fort Worth, he might come and start visiting the church here, which I said, would be wonderful. Love to have him. But what was fun was this lack of knowing, but simply being present and being connected. That's what the Beatitudes, I think, are all about. I think they're about allowing us that chance to be present to who we are and where we are, and to respond with openness as opposed to a given roadmap. Anyone else might be saying to themselves, I wasted the whole afternoon. Anyone else might be saying, this is not where I wanted to go. I needed to do other things. But the reality is that by being open to the moment, things were allowed to connect. Reuben Habito over in Dallas at the seminary at Perkins, professor of interreligious studies, he says that what poor in spirit really means to him is to downsize the I. Downsizing the I, not, the me. Less me, more you. Less me, more world. Less me, more creation. Less me, more God. He said poverty in spirit means downsizing the ego. Martin Luther King said this, none of us are free until all of us are free. There's this notion of emptying that allows us a chance to be more present to what actually is. Job, the perennial story of massive suffering, as his friends are talking to him about what's going on, he hears this word from God that says, if you really want to know, go talk to the plants. Go put your ear to the earth. Go be present with creation. All of life has stories to tell. There's an old Jewish tale that talks about a woman who went to a rabbi and she said, I want to know how to get rid of this pain that I'm in. I want to know how to get rid of this suffering that I'm in. And the rabbi says, this is a difficult thing, but it can be done. I can help you. And he said, but first you have to go and you have to find a house where there is no suffering, because you have to take a flower from them and bring that back. I need that pure flower. Find a place for me where there's not any suffering. Bring that flower back and I will begin to heal you. And she went around the village. And you know what happened? No matter where she went, what household she went to, she found suffering. But what was even more profound, because she was open and seeking, without a map particularly, they began to share stories. And every shared story reminded her, like many who have been through the experience of AA, like many who have been through other kinds of experiences of recovery and openness and vulnerability, is that we have a shared humanity. We have a common humanity. We have a shared presence in something that is so much greater than us. And after going all about the village, when she returned, she said, I couldn't find a flower, but I found connection. I found hope. And the rabbi smiled and said, now walk outside. Flowers are everywhere. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. There is something about this notion of poverty of spirit, of mournfulness, that opens us up to the suffering of the world, but not in a sense of taking on pain, more in a sense of recognizing we are a part of this world. We are a part of the suffering of this world. We are part of the hope in this world. But it first requires a willingness to see that. An emptying of the ego, of the I. Less of me, more of you. And that's a challenge. If I could tell you, I want you to leave here today, and I want you to simply say this one little Christian mantra. I'm going to mix up a whole bunch of religions here and say Christian mantra. I want you to leave here, and I want you to say, less of me and more of you. And I want you to say it wherever you find yourself. Car that cuts you off on the highway. Less of me and more of you. The person in front of you at the store. The person on Facebook that is really ticking you off. Less of me, more of you. I don't care on what side of the spectrum you're on. The old joke that I've told so many times about this is not about Democrats or Republicans, it's horse country. Some of you remember that joke. Others, you're going to have to tell it to the others who didn't hear that joke. It's not about that. It's a bigger picture, right? Life is so much bigger than our opinions. But we can't get there until we let go, until we empty. And that may mean, and I'm going to go ahead and use my wife as my foil here. That may mean, because she says this all the time, when she was a kid, her mom used to say to her, you would argue with a fence post. And in her little 7-year-old self, she said, Mom, I wouldn't argue if I wasn't right. Less of me, more of you. Less of me, more of you. Something begins to happen when we begin to do that. I think we begin to experience this other beatitude that Jesus then says, we become like the children of God. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. What is it about meekness that we discover life is all around us? What is it about meekness that someone like Viktor Frankl, who lived in the midst of Auschwitz and suffered in the prison camps as everybody was dying around him in horrible, horrific kinds of ways, and yet he found the essence and depth of meaning in the smallest and most minute moments? What is it about meekness that allows us to be powerful in the presence of conflict? Not overpowering, but powerful in seeing what is present in the moment, what is possible in the moment. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I was thinking about maps, and I went in with this image. You know, the ancient cartographers, when they formed out maps, they didn't know what was ahead beyond what they knew, right? So do you remember what they would put on these old maps if you go look them up? They would put dragons, fiery scorpions, evil monsters, sea monsters. That's what was beyond the knowledge. That was beyond what we knew, was just frightening. It's still present with us. It's still our map. But I wonder if it's possible to get to that place where we can say, what's beyond that? God. What's beyond that? The possibility of our being. Sacredness, holiness. Something that only we can experience when we get there. Do you remember that story about the man from Crete who couldn't get into the kingdom of heaven because he kept holding on to the soil which meant so much to him? And he clung tightly. And one after another, a friend of his would come out of the gates and say, you got to let go of that. You can't come in the kingdom. And then another 1,000 years, another would come out and a friend would say, we're having a good time. You can't come in until you let go of the soil. But he couldn't because it was everything, right? He clung to it. He couldn't let go of that. Until finally a child came out. A child smiled. It was his granddaughter. She smiled and says, why do you cling to that? What is it about that you can't let go of? And he said, I'm afraid. She said, what are you afraid of? He said, I don't know. She said, then let go. And as soon as he let the sand drift through his fingers, she walked with him, and through the gates, the first thing he saw, of course, was his island of Crete. Blessed are the poor in spirit, who have nothing, because they recognize that's when they begin to have everything. Blessed are those who mourn, who are in pain, and recognize they share that pain with the world around them. Blessed are the meek, who have discovered in that emptiness is power and connection and possibility. Amen.